The ballroom shimmered with gold and glass, a cathedral built for money and power. Every chandelier seemed to hum with self-importance. Every laugh was rehearsed. The Alcott Foundation Charity Gala was the kind of event that made headlines before it even began. And at the center of it all stood Richard Alcott, the billionaire philanthropist America adored. He was tall, grey at the temples, confident in the way only men who never heard no could be. Beside him stood his wife, Veronica Alcott, the image of poise, elegant, serene, untouchable. They were the perfect couple. The cameras believed it. The crowd believed it. Everyone believed it. Everyone except a 25-year-old waitress named Grace Miller. Grace balanced a silver tray of champagne flutes as she moved through the glittering crowd, her black heels pinching her toes. She wasn't supposed to look up. Waitresses didn't make eye contact at events like this. But when she did, her entire body froze. Veronica Alcott was smiling for a photo, her arm looped through her husband's. And in that smile, something flickered. The curve of her lips, the dimple in her left cheek, the soft, almond-shaped eyes. Grace's tray trembled. She knew that face. Not from magazines, not from television, but from her childhood. It was her mother's face. The same face Grace had kissed goodnight every day until she was 14. The same woman she had buried 11 years ago. Her breath caught in her throat. She blinked hard, once, twice trying to make the vision real. But it didn't go away. The ballroom applause roared as Richard took the stage, his voice booming through the microphone. "Tonight," he announced, "we celebrate family. We celebrate legacy." Family. The word stabbed through her. Grace felt heat rising in her chest, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. She forced her breathing steady, gripping the tray tighter. Maybe she was imagining it. Maybe grief was playing tricks on her. Then Veronica turned slightly, her diamond necklace catching the light, and Grace's knees nearly gave out. Hanging from that necklace was a pendant she knew by heart, a small sapphire heart inside a silver frame, with a faint crack along the edge. Grace's mother used to wear one, exactly like it. Her mother's last words echoed in her mind. "Never trust what shines too bright." Richard raised his glass. "To my wife, Veronica, my heart, my truth." The room cheered. Cameras flashed, and Grace couldn't breathe. The tray slipped from her hand. Crystal shattered on marble. Conversations halted. Heads turned. Grace stood frozen in the center of the glittering floor, surrounded by broken glass and fizzing champagne. Her chest heaved. Her eyes locked with Veronica's. For a moment, time stopped. Veronica's polite social smile faltered. Her gaze, once distant and practiced, turned wide, unguarded. Her hand trembled, clutching the pendant at her throat. And then she whispered something, so soft Grace almost didn't hear it. "Grace?" Grace's blood ran cold. Every sound in the ballroom vanished. The music, the murmurs, the laughter. There was only that one name, spoken by the woman she thought was dead. Guests looked from one to the other, confused. Richard's head snapped toward his wife, his face tightening like stone. Grace took a half-step back, her voice shaking. What did you just call me?" Veronica's lips parted, her eyes glistening. But before she could speak again, Richard stepped between them, smiling for the cameras. "Everything's fine," he said smoothly, his voice tight. "Just a clumsy moment." But his eyes, cold and furious, told a different story. Grace's heart pounded as security began to move toward her. She realized then, with terrifying clarity, that whatever had just happened wasn't supposed to happen at all. And in that instant, she knew. The billionaire's perfect life was built on a lie. The staff break room smelled like burnt coffee and cheap perfume. Grace sat on a crate beside the vending machine, her hands still trembling. Her manager, Monica, paced in front of her like an anxious cat. "What the hell happened out there, Grace?" Monica hissed. "You just dropped a tray in front of Richard Alcott. Half the city's cameras were rolling." Grace opened her mouth, but no sound came out. I saw someone." "Yeah, you saw your career flash before your eyes," Monica snapped. Then she sighed, lowering her voice. "Look, honey, just go home. Take the night off before security decides you're a liability." Grace nodded numbly. Home. Right. Outside, New York's midnight air slapped her across the face, sharp and real. The Gala lights still glowed in the distance, like a mirage she couldn't escape. She walked 3 blocks to the subway, the sound of her heels echoing against the concrete. The train was nearly empty. A man slept across 2 seats. A homeless woman hummed softly to herself, and Grace stared at her reflection in the window, her pale face, wide eyes, the faint smear of champagne on her sleeve. It all looked unreal. She whispered to her reflection, "You're seeing things. She's dead. Mum's dead." But then she remembered that whisper. Grace? And the way the woman's eyes had widened. Not confusion. Recognition. By the time she reached her apartment in Queens, her thoughts were tangled threads she couldn't untie. The building was old, its walls thin enough to hear the neighbor's TV, and the couple upstairs arguing about rent. Grace unlocked her door quietly, trying not to wake her little brother. "Grace?" Too late. Eli, 19, sat at the kitchen table surrounded by textbooks. His breathing machine hummed faintly beside him. He smiled weakly. "You're home early. How was the fancy Billionaire circus?" Grace forced a smile and kicked off her shoes. "You don't want to know. Did they at least tip?" "Not enough to fix this place," she muttered. He watched her for a moment, sensing something off. "You look like you saw a ghost." Grace froze. Then she laughed, a brittle, hollow sound. "Yeah, maybe I did." Eli frowned. "You okay?" She poured herself a glass of tap water, staring at the cracked linoleum floor. I saw someone tonight who looked like Mom." Eli's expression softened, but not with surprise. He'd seen this before. The dreams, the grief that never really faded. "Grace, I know," she interrupted. "I know it sounds crazy, but she looked exactly like her. Same face, same necklace." He wheeled closer. "You've been working too much. You barely sleep." Grace shook her head. "No, Eli, this wasn't in my head. When she saw me, she said my name." That silenced him. The only sound was the quiet hiss of the breathing machine. After a long moment, Eli said softly, "Maybe she's just someone who looks like her. People say everyone's got a double, right?" Grace wanted to believe that. She really did. But she could still hear the woman's voice, the exact tone her mother used when calling her in from the yard at sunset. She set the glass down with a thud. "I'm going back tomorrow." Eli looked alarmed. "What? You just got kicked out of there." "Then I'll get another shift, another event, something. I need to know who that woman is." He sighed. "And if you're wrong?" Grace met his eyes. "Then I can finally stop wondering. But if I'm right," her voice dropped to a whisper, "then Mom didn't die. She was taken." The words hung heavy in the air, impossible and terrifying. And deep down, Grace knew she'd just opened a door she could never close again. The next evening, the sky over Manhattan dripped gold. Sunset bounced off glass towers and tinted the streets the color of fire. Grace adjusted her black uniform in the service elevator of the Plaza Astoria, a hotel so expensive the napkins had monograms. She had pulled every string to land this shift. It wasn't technically her job, but one of her co-workers owed her a favor. The event tonight? Another Alcott Foundation fundraiser. As the elevator doors opened, the world above glittered like a dream. Crystal chandeliers, velvet drapes, white roses arranged like small planets. Every surface gleamed with wealth. Grace stepped into the ballroom and forced her heartbeat to slow. She told herself she wasn't here for revenge. She was here for truth. "Keep your tray steady," a senior waiter whispered as he passed her. "They can smell fear." She managed a nod, balancing a tray of wine glasses, her eyes scanning the room. Richard Alcott was there, shaking hands, charming donors, his smile as polished as the floor beneath him. Beside him, Veronica. Same dark hair, same sapphire necklace that used to rest against her mother's skin. Grace's breath caught. The pendant sparkled as Veronica leaned forward to greet a senator. The sapphire caught the light, and for a second, Grace saw her mother's gentle face beneath the makeup, beneath the perfection. She moved closer, her hands slick with sweat. She was careful, pretending to offer drinks to nearby guests. Every step brought her closer to the truth she wasn't sure she wanted. A woman in a red gown leaned toward Grace. "Are you new? You don't look like the usual staff." Grace forced a smile. "Just filling in." The woman chuckled. "Well, welcome to the jungle. Careful. Richard Alcott doesn't tolerate mistakes." "I've heard," Grace said softly. Music swelled from the live orchestra, a romantic waltz that made the marble floor shimmer with movement. Couples spun in designer gowns. Veronica danced with Richard, her laughter light but empty. Grace watched her, searching for anything, any flicker of truth behind that perfect smile. Then across the room, she noticed something strange. Two security guards in dark suits whispered into earpieces, their eyes fixed on her. Her pulse spiked. She turned away, pretending to refill a champagne flute. "Keep moving," she muttered under her breath. At the buffet table, she spotted a small clutch resting near the edge of the counter. Elegant, ivory-colored, trimmed with gold. Embossed initials gleamed faintly. NM, her mother's initials. Nora Miller. Grace's hand hovered above the purse. Her mind screamed, "Don't," but her heart didn't listen. She reached for it. "Excuse me." A deep voice cut through the noise. Grace froze. It was him, Richard Alcott. He stood inches away, towering, his charm turned down to 0. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "You seem very interested in my wife's things." I was just serving drinks," he finished smoothly. "Funny, most servers don't stare at guests like prey." Her throat tightened. "I didn't mean any disrespect." Richard leaned in close, his whisper low and sharp. "You were at the gala last night, weren't you? The one who made the scene." Grace swallowed. "It was an accident." "Sure it was." His eyes flicked toward the clutch. "You'll want to keep your curiosity to yourself, Miss Miller." Her blood turned cold. He knew her name. She hadn't given it. Richard smiled again, the kind of smile that promised danger wrapped in politeness. "Enjoy the evening, and stay out of trouble." He walked away, blending into the crowd, leaving her shaken. Grace looked back at the clutch, her pulse hammering. And then she saw it. Veronica watching her from across the room, eyes wide with something that looked a lot like fear. Grace spent the rest of the night moving through the ballroom like a shadow, pretending to refill glasses while trying not to collapse under the weight of Richard Alcott's warning. Her mind replayed his words on a loop. He knew her name. He knew who she was. That wasn't just power. That was control. She tried to keep her distance from Veronica, but every time she looked across the room, the woman's gaze found her. It wasn't hostile. It was haunted. There was something in those eyes, something pleading, as if she wanted to say something but couldn't. "Grace!" The voice came from behind her. She spun around and almost dropped her tray again. It was Leo, one of the other servers she'd begged to get her on the roster tonight. "Hey," he whispered. "The boss saw you talking to Alcott. What was that about?" "Nothing," she said too quickly. "He was just asking if I needed help." Leo gave her a look. "Rich guys don't offer help, sweetheart. They give orders." "I can handle it," he shrugged. "Suit yourself. Just don't get fired on my shift." As Leo walked away, Grace steadied herself. Across the room, Veronica Alcott stood near the balcony, her expression distant. The crowd was thinning out now, some guests leaving, others drunk enough to forget their manners. Grace's chance was slipping away. She took a breath, set down her tray, and crossed the marble floor. Every step echoed. When she reached Veronica, the woman startled slightly, then forced a smile. "Would you like another drink, ma'am?" Grace asked softly. Veronica hesitated. Her voice trembled. "You shouldn't be here." Grace's pulse quickened. "You know me." Veronica's eyes darted around nervously. "Please," she whispered, "walk away before he sees." "Before who sees?" Grace pressed. "Richard? He already knows my name." That hit her. Veronica's painted smile faltered completely. "Then you're in danger." Grace took a half step closer. "Who are you?" For a heartbeat, Veronica looked ready to answer. But then Richard appeared at the edge of the crowd, scanning the room. The instant she saw him, her whole body stiffened. The transformation was terrifying. Graceful wife to frozen statue. Grace whispered urgently, "Please, just tell me the truth." Veronica's eyes glistened. "You don't understand what he's capable of." "Try me." Richard was moving toward them now, cutting through donors and servers like a shark through water. Veronica's voice broke. "He made me disappear once. He can do it again." Grace's breath caught. "Disappear?" Before she could ask more, Richard reached them. "Honey," he said smoothly, wrapping an arm around Veronica's waist. "There you are. I've been looking everywhere for you." Veronica stiffened under his touch, but she forced a smile for the watching guests. "I was just speaking with the staff." Richard's gaze slid to Grace. "I can see that." His tone was casual, but his eyes burned. Grace felt her stomach twist. "I should get back to work," she said quickly. "Do," Richard replied. "But next time, maybe remember your place." He turned back to his wife, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek with calculated affection. "My wife tends to attract strays. Don't make yourself one." Grace bit her tongue and walked away, heart racing. Behind her, the music swelled again, but it sounded wrong, off-key, like something beautiful being strangled. She reached the service hallway and leaned against the wall, gasping for breath. Her hands shook. She wanted to run, but she couldn't, not now, not when she was this close. From the ballroom came a faint crash, a glass hitting the floor. Then a woman's soft gasp. Grace turned sharply, peering through the crack in the door. Veronica stood alone now, staring down at the shattered wine glass near her feet. Her hand shook violently, and as Grace watched, Veronica's lips formed two silent words that made her blood turn to ice. "Help me." Grace didn't go home that night. She sat on a park bench across from the hotel until sunrise, the city humming awake around her. Her phone buzzed non-stop. Monica, her manager, firing off angry texts, but Grace didn't care. She couldn't shake the image of Veronica's trembling hand or the words that still echoed in her mind. "He made me disappear once." By morning, Grace had made up her mind. She went back to the hotel, marched into the kitchen, and begged the event coordinator for another shift. "Please," she said, "I'll do anything. Dishwashing, clean up, I don't care." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "You've got guts, kid, but tonight's a private luncheon. Very exclusive. Alcott's hosting again." "Then you need staff," she pushed. "Let me help." He hesitated, then finally gave in. "Fine. But if security so much as looks at you funny, you're gone." That afternoon, Grace tied her apron tighter than usual and stepped into the banquet room. It was smaller than the gala, more intimate. Just 20 guests seated around a long mahogany table. Cameras were set up at one end, broadcasting live to a charity live stream. Richard Alcott stood at the head, speaking with polished ease, a glass of water in hand. Veronica sat beside him, pale and quiet, like a ghost in pearls. Grace moved silently along the wall, refilling glasses, trying to stay invisible. But as she leaned to pour water near the head of the table, she felt eyes on her. Richard's. He smiled, that same politician's smile. "Ah, our diligent waitress," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I remember you from the Gala, the one with coordination problems, wasn't it?" Laughter rippled down the table. Grace froze, the pitcher trembling slightly in her grip. Richard continued, his tone dripping with mock kindness. "Tell me, young lady, do you enjoy working events like these? Serving people who, let's be honest, don't even notice you?" Grace's throat tightened. "I just do my job, sir." "Of course you do," he said, raising his glass. "And we all appreciate your service. After all, not everyone can handle success. Some of us are born to serve it." More laughter, phones discreetly recorded. Grace's face burned, but she refused to look away. She met his eyes and saw something flicker there. A warning. "Stay silent." She set the pitcher down, forcing her voice steady. "With all due respect, sir, some of us are just trying to make an honest living." Richard's smile froze. The air shifted. He leaned forward slightly. "Honest living," he repeated, like the words tasted sour. "That's noble. But tell me, how honest is it to sneak into events you weren't invited to?" Gasps whispered through the room. Grace's stomach dropped. He gestured to the security guard standing near the exit. "You've been following her, haven't you? Turns out our ambitious waitress here has a habit of showing up where she doesn't belong." The guard stepped forward. Cameras clicked. Grace's pulse thundered in her ears. "That's not true," she said, her voice trembling. "I was asked to work today." Richard chuckled, turning to the guests. "She says she was asked. Sweetheart, this is a private foundation event. I personally approve every staff list." Her words caught in her throat. Everyone stared. Even Veronica looked stricken, but said nothing. "Go ahead," Richard said softly, still smiling. "Tell them who sent you." Grace stood there, humiliated, her voice cracking. I just wanted to talk to your wife." The laughter stopped cold. Richard's expression hardened, his eyes dark as storm clouds. "You wanted what?" Grace swallowed. "I think she knows someone I lost." Richard stepped closer, lowering his voice but not his venom. "You don't speak to her. You don't look at her. And if you ever show your face near us again, I'll make sure you can't work in this city, or any other." He turned to the crowd, all smiles again. "Now let's return to something important. Charity." Grace's cheeks burned, tears stinging her eyes as the guards escorted her out. But before the door closed, she saw Veronica stand up, her lips trembling, and mouth one silent, forbidden word. "Daughter." Grace didn't cry until she reached the alley behind the hotel. The wind carried the faint echo of applause from inside, the same people who'd laughed at her, now cheering for the man who'd humiliated her. She pressed her hands against the cold brick wall, her chest heaving. Her whole body shook with anger and shame. She replayed the moment again and again. Richard's smug smile, the cameras, the way everyone had looked at her like she was dirt under their shoes. But what haunted her most was that single word Veronica had mouthed before Grace was dragged out. "Daughter." Grace wiped her eyes, forcing herself to breathe. "She said it," she whispered. "She actually said it." Her phone buzzed. A text from Eli. "You okay? You didn't come home." She stared at the screen, then typed back. "I found her. Mum's alive." She hit send before she could talk herself out of it. For hours, she wandered the streets, the city blurring into lights and noise. Every thought felt too big to hold. If her mother was alive, if that woman truly was Nora, then everything she'd been told was a lie. She ended up at a 24-hour diner in Midtown, the kind of place where the coffee burned your tongue, but nobody cared if you stayed all night. The waitress behind the counter poured her a cup without asking. Grace stared into the steam, her mind racing. The doorbell jingled. She didn't look up until a soft voice said, You shouldn't be here. Her head snapped up. Veronica stood in the doorway, wearing a long grey coat and dark sunglasses despite the fluorescent lights. Grace shot to her feet. You, please, Veronica whispered, glancing around nervously. Sit down. Quickly. Grace sat, heart pounding. Why did you come? Veronica slid into the booth across from her. Up close, she looked older than she had at the gala, exhausted, frightened. Because what he did today was cruel, and because I don't have much time. Who are you? Grace demanded. You called me your daughter. Veronica's hand trembled around her coffee cup. Because you are. Grace's breath caught. For a moment, the whole world seemed to tilt. That's impossible. My mother's name was Nora Miller. She died in a car crash when I was 14. Veronica's eyes filled with tears. No, Grace. There was an accident. Yes, but I didn't die. Richard made sure everyone thought I did. Grace shook her head. Why would he do that? Because I knew things, Veronica whispered. Things that could ruin him. I tried to leave, to protect you and Eli. He said if I didn't disappear, he'd destroy you both. Grace stared at her, numb. So you let us believe you were dead? I thought it was the only way, Veronica said, her voice cracking. He had power I couldn't fight. He owned the police, the press, everyone. Grace's hands clenched into fists. You could have found a way. You could have called. I grew up thinking I buried you. Tears streamed down Veronica's cheeks. I wanted to, but he watched me, every second. You don't understand what that man is capable of. Grace leaned across the table, her voice sharp with pain. Then why tell me now? Because you're already in danger, Veronica whispered. He knows who you are. He'll come for you. Grace felt her stomach twist. Let him. I'm not afraid of him. Veronica grabbed her hand, her grip surprisingly strong. You should be. The diner door opened behind them. A man in a dark suit stepped inside, scanning the room. Veronica's face went white. Too late, she whispered. Grace turned. The man's eyes met hers. And as he reached into his coat, Veronica whispered the words that would change everything. Run, Grace. He's not coming for me. He's coming for you. Grace didn't think. She moved. The second Veronica whispered, run, she was already sliding out of the booth, knocking over her coffee. The scalding liquid splashed across the table as the man in the dark suit lunged forward. Grace, go! Veronica shouted. Grace sprinted for the back door of the diner, her shoes slipping on the greasy floor. The cook yelled something, plates crashed, and the bell above the door jingled violently as she burst into the alley. Cold rain hit her face. She ran, heart pounding like gunfire, her breath sharp in her throat. Behind her, heavy footsteps splashed through puddles. She didn't stop until she reached the next block, ducking behind a delivery truck. Her hands shook as she looked back. The man had stopped at the end of the alley, speaking into an earpiece. He wasn't chasing her anymore. He didn't have to. He knew who she was. Grace pressed her palms to her face, trying to think. She needed to get to Eli. If Richard really had people following her, her brother wasn't safe. She flagged down a cab, breathless. Queens, 23rd and Crescent. Please hurry. The driver gave her a strange look, but didn't ask questions. As the city blurred by outside the window, Grace tried to calm her mind. Her mother, no, Veronica, was alive, and if what she'd said was true, Richard Alcott had built his empire on more than money and power. He'd built it on fear. When the cab stopped in front of their building, Grace threw a handful of crumpled bills at the driver and ran upstairs. She burst through the apartment door. Eli! He looked up from the couch, startled. What happened? You look like you've seen a ghost. Grace locked the door behind her and lowered the blinds. Pack a bag, she said, breathless. We need to leave. Leave? What are you talking about? They know who I am. Richard Alcott. He's sending people after me. Eli blinked, confused. Grace, you're not making sense. You're scaring me. She grabbed his shoulders. I found Mom, Eli. She's alive." The words hung between them. He stared at her like she'd just said the sky was falling. "That's not funny." "I'm not joking." Grace's voice cracked. "I saw her. I talked to her. She said Richard faked her death." Eli sank into the couch, shaking his head slowly. No, that can't be real. Mom died in that car crash. I saw the photos." Grace's throat tightened. "They never showed the body. Don't you get it? He made her disappear because she knew something. Something dangerous." Eli's face went pale. "If that's true, then what does he want from us?" Before Grace could answer, a soft ping echoed through the apartment. Her phone. A text from an unknown number. "You have something that belongs to him. Stop digging or he stops pretending to be merciful." Her stomach dropped. She looked around the room as if someone were watching through the walls. Eli grabbed the phone. "What does that mean?" Grace's voice trembled. "I don't know, but we can't stay here." She started stuffing clothes into a duffel bag. Eli tried to help, but his hands were shaking too hard. "Where will we go?" "Somewhere he can't reach us," she said. "At least for tonight." As they packed, Grace's phone buzzed again. Another message. This time, there was an attachment. A photo. Her blood ran cold. It was a picture of Eli, taken through their apartment window. The caption read, "You can't run from family." The phone slipped from her hands. "He's watching us," she whispered. Eli's breathing quickened. "Grace, what do we do?" She grabbed his hand, her voice low but fierce. "We fight back." And as thunder cracked outside, Grace made a promise she couldn't afford to break. This time, she would finish what her mother couldn't. They didn't sleep that night. Grace and Eli sat on the floor of their small living room. The TV turned off. Every light dimmed. Rain beat softly against the window. But it wasn't the storm outside that made Grace's heart race. It was the one inside her. Every sound felt dangerous. Every call that passed below could have been one of Richard's men. Eli finally broke the silence. "Grace, if what you're saying is true, if Mom's alive, then why now? Why show up after all these years?" Grace rubbed her temples, exhaustion heavy in her bones. "Because I found her. I think she's been waiting for a chance to reach me. Maybe Richard slipped up." He frowned. "So what now? We hide forever?" Grace looked at him, her expression hardening. "No. We find out what she was trying to protect us from." Eli laughed weakly. "You make it sound easy." "It's not. But I'm done being afraid." She stood, pacing the room. Her phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a threat. It was a message from an unknown email address. "If you want the truth, come alone." 11 p.m. Pier 47. Grace showed it to Eli. "No way," he said immediately. "It's a trap." "Maybe," Grace admitted. "But if Mum sent it..." Eli grabbed her arm. "You can't just walk into something like that. What if he's waiting for you?" She squeezed his hand. "Then at least I'll know." At 10:45, Grace stood at the edge of Pier 47. The Hudson River stretched out before her, black and endless, the city lights shimmering like broken glass on the water. The wind carried the sharp tang of salt and diesel. A single figure stood near the end of the dock. Veronica. Grace's pulse jumped. She started walking, her footsteps echoing on the wet wood. "You shouldn't have come," she called softly. "I had to," Veronica said, her voice trembling. "He's losing control. The more desperate he gets, the more dangerous he becomes." "Then tell me everything," Grace said. "Tell me why you let me think you were dead." Veronica's eyes shimmered under the weak glow of the dock lights. Richard was already in trouble back then. He'd built his fortune on a lie, a cover-up. I found out the truth and he panicked. He said if I exposed him, he'd ruin me and take you away. I tried to run. The crash. That was his way of erasing me. Grace stared at her, her chest tight. What kind of cover-up? Veronica hesitated. A man died. A partner. Richard staged it as an accident. His company was built on the insurance payout from that death. If that comes out, everything collapses. Grace took a shaky step back. So that's it. You hid because of money. Tears streamed down Veronica's face. I hid because of you, because I couldn't protect you if I was dead. He's powerful enough to rewrite the law. Grace shook her head, overwhelmed. And now? He's threatening Eli. He sent people after me. Veronica reached into her coat and pulled out a small flash drive. Everything you need is on this. Proof, contracts, letters, his confession. I've been collecting it for years, waiting for the right moment. Grace stared at it, her hand trembling as she took it. Why give it to me? Because you're not afraid of him, Veronica whispered. And because if anything happens to me, you'll know what to do. A loud engine roared in the distance. Headlights swept across the dock. Veronica turned sharply, eyes wide. He found us! Grace spun around. A black SUV was speeding toward the pier. Go! Veronica shouted. Run! Grace hesitated. I'm not leaving you. Veronica grabbed her shoulders, desperate. You have to! This is bigger than both of us. The car doors flew open, men in suits spilling out, flashlights cutting through the darkness. And as Grace turned to flee, she heard a single gunshot crack through the night, and her mother's scream vanished into the wind. The gunshot echoed across the water, swallowed by the night and the roar of the SUV's engine. Grace dropped behind a stack of wooden crates, her hands pressed against her ears, her whole body shaking. She couldn't breathe. Mom! She screamed, her voice cracking. But there was no answer. Another shout came from the dock, men yelling to each other, their flashlights slicing through the fog. Grace peeked out for half a second. Veronica was gone. The pier was empty except for a single shoe lying near the edge, glinting under the lights. No, Grace whispered, her chest tightening. No, no, no! She ran toward it, but headlights flared again, blinding her. One of the men spotted her. There! Grace turned and sprinted. Her legs felt like lead, her lungs burning. She could hear the men shouting behind her, the crunch of boots on wet pavement. Somewhere nearby, a siren wailed, distant but growing louder. She darted down a side street, climbed a chain-link fence, and didn't stop running until her legs gave out. She collapsed behind a dumpster, gasping for air. The flash drive was still in her pocket. She clutched it like a lifeline. It was slick with sweat, but unbroken. Her mother's last act. By the time Grace made it back to the apartment, dawn was bleeding into the sky. Eli was pacing the floor, wild-eyed. Where were you? He shouted the second she walked in. I thought, she's gone, Grace said, her voice hollow. Eli froze. What do you mean, gone? She gave me this, Grace said, holding up the flash drive. Then he found us. There was a gunshot. Eli's face drained of color. You think he killed her? Grace sank onto the couch, her body trembling. I don't know. But if he didn't, he will. Unless we stop him. He stared at her like she'd lost her mind. Grace, you can't fight a man like Richard Alcott. He owns everything. The cops, the media. Then we go around him, she interrupted. Mom said this has proof. If we can get it to someone who'll actually listen, an investigator, a reporter, maybe it's enough to bring him down. Eli hesitated. You're talking about going to war with a billionaire. Grace met his eyes. He already declared war when he came after us. She plugged the flash drive into her laptop. The screen flickered, loading a folder labeled Truth. Inside were dozens of files, contracts, emails, scanned documents. At the top was one audio file, time-stamped just a week ago. Grace clicked play. Richard's voice filled the room. Calm, smooth, and terrifying. Do you understand what happens if she talks? Everything falls apart. The foundation, the board, the family name. I built an empire on the ashes of that accident. No one needs to know it wasn't an accident. Eli's mouth fell open. He admitted it. Grace's pulse raced. We have him. This is what Mom was hiding all these years. Eli leaned closer. Then we take it to the police. She shook her head. He'll bury it before it hits their desks. We need to make it public. Public? Eli repeated. Like online? Grace's eyes darkened. Like live. Somewhere he can't spin it. She stood, her exhaustion replaced by pure adrenaline. He's hosting another event tomorrow. Another broadcast. I'm going to crash it. Eli grabbed her arm. Grace, you'll get yourself killed. Then so be it, she said fiercely. He destroyed Mom's life. He tried to destroy ours. I'm done hiding. Eli looked at her, terrified but also something else. Proud. You really are her daughter, he said quietly. Grace nodded, slipping the flash drive into her pocket. And he's about to find that out. The next morning, the city looked the same. But everything in Grace's world had changed. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the pier, the flash of headlights, her mother's face vanishing into the fog. The sound of that gunshot haunted her. Eli had tried to talk her out of it, but she was already gone in her mind, focused, sharp, burning. By noon, she was standing outside Alcott Tower, the gleaming glass skyscraper that cut into the clouds like a blade. The lobby was all marble and security cameras. Grace wore a borrowed blazer, her hair pulled back tight, the flash drive hidden inside her sleeve. She looked like any other young professional, except for the fury in her eyes. The receptionist smiled politely. Do you have an appointment, ma'am? Grace's voice was steady. Tell Richard Alcott, his daughter is here. The woman blinked. I'm sorry, Tell him, Grace repeated, her tone cold enough to cut glass. Minutes later, 2 security guards flanked her and led her into a private elevator. Grace didn't fight it. She wanted this meeting. She wanted him to see her, really see her. When the elevator doors opened, Richard was waiting in his office, back to the skyline, suit immaculate, expression unreadable. He didn't look surprised. Grace Miller, he said smoothly. Or should I say, Grace Alcott. Grace's jaw tightened. You knew. I've always known. He gestured toward the chair across from him. Sit. I'll stand. Richard chuckled softly, walking around his desk. You look just like her, you know. Same fire, same stupidity. Grace's hands clenched. You killed her. His smile never wavered. Careful. Accusations like that can ruin people. She gave me proof, Grace shot back. Everything you've done, the fake death, the insurance fraud, the partner you murdered. I have it all. Richard studied her for a long moment, then sighed like a disappointed parent. You think you're the first person who's tried to take me down? I've buried senators, Grace. I've bought judges. I've rewritten headlines. You're a waitress with a flash drive. Grace stepped closer, her voice shaking but firm. I'm your daughter. His smile faded. Not anymore. Silence filled the room like smoke. Grace could feel her pulse in her throat. You built an empire on lies, she said quietly. But I'm not afraid of you. Richard moved closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. You should be. Because, unlike your mother, I don't make the same mistake twice. Grace's stomach turned. What did you do to her? He tilted his head, pretending to think. Let's just say she served her purpose. And you? Well, you were supposed to stay invisible. She promised me you would. Grace's heart cracked open. She was protecting me. She was weak, Richard said flatly. I gave her a choice, silence or ruin. She chose silence. Grace's anger boiled over. You don't get to talk about her like that. For the first time, his voice hardened. You'll learn soon enough. Family is nothing without loyalty. And you, Grace, have already betrayed yours, Russell. Before she could respond, the office door opened. A man stepped inside, The same one from the pier. Richard didn't even glance at him. "Follow her. Make sure she understands the consequences of playing hero." Grace's blood ran cold. She turned toward the door, but Richard called after her, his voice smooth and lethal. "You can run if you want. But remember this, your mother thought she could expose me too. Look where that got her." Grace stopped, her fists trembling. She turned to face him, her eyes blazing. "You're right about one thing." He arched a brow. "Oh?" Grace's voice was steady, deadly calm. "I am just like her. And that's exactly why you're going to lose." Grace didn't go home after leaving Alcott Tower. She didn't even slow down. The rain had started again, steady and cold, soaking her hair and blazer as she walked aimlessly through the city. Every word Richard said replayed in her mind. His smug tone, his calm cruelty. He knew everything. Her name, her mother, the proof. He'd taken everything from them and still stood untouchable at the top of his glass kingdom. But not for long. Grace ducked into a small cafe, dripping water onto the tiled floor. She ordered nothing. Instead, she pulled the flash drive from her sleeve and plugged it into her laptop. She had to know what was inside, what her mother risked everything for. The folder labeled Truth opened again, and Grace scrolled through the files. There were scanned documents, contracts with fake signatures, offshore accounts under aliases. And then, one file caught her eye. It wasn't labeled like the others, just a single word. Evidence. She clicked it. The screen filled with photos, some old, some new. Her mother and Richard together at lavish events. Then darker ones, men in suits around a burning car, police reports marked confidential, and a certificate of death. Nora Miller, age 38. Cause, accident. The signature on the bottom wasn't a coroner's, it was Richard's. Grace's stomach twisted. He'd signed her mother's death himself. Her hands shook as she scrolled further. Buried at the bottom was a final document, one that made her breath catch. A birth certificate. Hers. She stared at the name printed under Father. Richard Alcott. Her vision blurred. "He knew," she whispered. "He knew the whole time." Tears welled in her eyes, but anger burned hotter. She grabbed her phone and called Eli. He answered on the first ring. "Grace, where are you? You disappeared again." "I found something," she interrupted. "He forged Mom's death certificate. And my birth record. I'm his daughter on paper, Eli. He's been hiding it." Eli was silent for a long moment. Then quietly, "What do we do with that?" Grace wiped her eyes. "We use it. We expose him." She didn't notice the man sitting at the counter until it was too late. He was pretending to stir his coffee, but his reflection in the cafe window was turned toward her, the same man from the pier. Grace's heart skipped. "Eli, I have to go." She hung up, stuffed the laptop into her bag, and bolted for the back door. The man stood up immediately, speaking into his earpiece. Grace pushed through the kitchen, slipping past startled cooks, and burst into the alley. She sprinted into the street, blending with pedestrians, her breath sharp and ragged. Her mind raced. The flash drive wasn't enough. If Richard controlled the press and the police, she needed someone beyond his reach, someone who couldn't be bought. An idea struck. Her mother once mentioned a friend, a journalist she trusted, someone who'd tried to help her before she disappeared. Grace searched the folder again as she walked. One email stood out, half buried in the files. A chain between Nora Miller and E. Harkins. The Ledger Journal. She typed quickly. "Mr. Harkins, this is Nora's daughter. I have proof of Richard Alcott's crimes. If I don't make it, tell the world." She hit send and kept walking. A text appeared seconds later from an unknown number. "You think the world will believe a waitress?" Grace stopped dead. Her skin went cold. She turned and saw a black sedan creeping slowly down the block. Another text buzzed in. "Your mother thought evidence would save her, too." Grace backed into a doorway, her pulse hammering. Then another message came, final and chilling. "Check your email, Grace. We left you something of your mother's." Her phone dinged. She opened her inbox. A video file had arrived, time-stamped that morning. It showed Veronica, bound to a chair, whispering through tears, "Grace, don't let him win." And then the screen went black. Grace's scream caught in her throat. The image on her phone froze mid-frame. Her mother's face pale, terrified, eyes begging for help. Then the video cut to static. No location. No sound. Just her name in white letters across the screen. Grace Alcott. Her hands trembled so hard, she nearly dropped the phone. She tried replaying it, but the file had already vanished, deleted remotely. Whoever sent it wanted her scared, not informed. She stumbled backward, hitting the wall of the alley, her pulse pounding. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but another voice, quieter, stronger, said, "No. Fight." She stuffed the phone into her pocket, pulled up her hood, and started moving fast through the rain. Across the street, the black sedan crept after her. She ducked into the subway, slipping through the turnstiles just as the doors of a departing train slid shut behind her. The men chasing her didn't make it on. Grace sank into a corner seat, soaked, shaking, but alive. She tried to steady her breath, the rhythm of the train clattering like her heartbeat. Her reflection in the dark window looked like a stranger, a woman caught between fear and fury. When she got off at 14th Street, she walked straight to the only person she still trusted, Eli. He opened the door before she even knocked. "Grace, thank God. I thought you—" "I'm fine," she said, brushing past him. "Lock the door." He did, eyeing her nervously. "You're not fine. You look like you crawled out of a storm drain." "Close enough?" She tossed her soaked bag on the couch and pulled out the flash drive. "Listen, they have Mom. I got a video. She's alive." Eli froze. "What? Where?" "I don't know. They sent it to scare me. But it means she's still breathing." Eli ran a hand through his hair. "Grace, you can't keep doing this alone. We need help." "I already reached out to someone," she said. "A journalist. Edward Harkins, the Ledger Journal. Mom trusted him. If anyone can make the truth public, it's him." "And you trust him?" Eli asked carefully. Grace hesitated. "I don't have a choice." Eli looked at her, his expression softening. "You sound like Mom." Grace tried to smile, but it didn't hold. "That's what scares me." They spent the next few hours digging through the files on the drive again. Grace replayed Richard's voice from the recorded confession, rewinding each word, imagining how it would sound broadcast to millions. When Eli stepped out to get food, Grace checked her email again. A new message blinked at the top of her inbox. From Harkins. "Got your note. Meet me tonight, 9 p.m. Old train yard on 53rd. No phones. Bring proof." She read it twice, unease twisting in her gut. Why would a journalist pick a place like that? Still, she didn't have time to doubt. Eli returned, holding takeout bags. "What's that look?" "I have a meeting," she said. "With the reporter." "Yeah." Eli frowned. "Then I'm coming." "No, it said to come alone." "Grace, this isn't up for debate." He sighed, defeated. "At least promise me you'll be careful." Grace nodded, though neither of them believed it. That night, the train yard was a wasteland of rusted cars and broken lights. Grace walked slowly between the tracks, rain dripping from the brim of her hood. "Mr. Harkins?" she called softly. A figure stepped out from behind an old boxcar. He wasn't holding a notebook. He was holding a gun. "Sorry, Grace," the man said quietly. "He knew you'd reach out." Grace's breath caught as she recognized the voice. It wasn't the reporter. It was the man from the pier. And before she could run, he said the words that froze her blood. "Your mother bought you one more day. Don't waste it." The sound of the man's voice shattered the silence. Grace stood frozen in the rain, her pulse hammering in her ears. The gun gleamed in the faint light from the broken lamppost. "What did you do to her?" she demanded, her voice shaking but defiant. The man didn't answer right away. He lowered the gun just slightly, his jaw tight. "Your mother made a deal. She kept you alive by staying quiet. You're breaking that deal." Grace took a slow step back, her shoes sinking into the mud between the tracks. "If she's still alive, I can still save her." He gave a dry, humorless laugh. "Save her? She's already dead where it counts. You can't fight Richard Alcott. No one can." Grace met his eyes. "Then watch me." She turned and ran. The man shouted, but she didn't hear the words over the thunder in her chest. The sharp crack of a gunshot split the air. Something hissed past her shoulder, close enough to feel. She dove behind a rusted train car, heart slamming, mud splattering across her face. The man's voice echoed, "Don't make me do this, Grace. He wants you alive. For now." She crouched lower, clutching the flash drive in her fist. Her mind raced. If he wanted her alive, she still had leverage. A beam of light swept across the yard as he moved closer. Grace spotted a loose metal coupling near her foot. She grabbed it, waited until the flashlight beam passed, then threw it hard against a pile of crates in the distance. The noise drew his attention. "There!" he barked, running toward the sound. Grace bolted in the opposite direction, sprinting toward the perimeter fence. Her fingers tore on the metal links as she climbed, her breath ragged. She jumped, hit the ground hard, and rolled to her feet, running until the world blurred around her. By the time she reached a main street, her legs were shaking, her body numb from adrenaline and rain. She ducked into a gas station restroom, locked the door, and stared at herself in the mirror. Mud streaked her cheeks. Blood trickled from a cut on her arm. But her eyes, they burned. She whispered to her reflection, "He wants to play dirty. Fine." She pulled out her phone, wiped the screen dry, and typed a new message. "You were right, Mum. He'll never stop. But neither will I." Then she opened her email and drafted a single message addressed to every major news outlet she could find. She attached the audio file of Richard's confession. Before hitting send, she hesitated. She knew what would happen. He'd retaliate. He'd come after Eli. He'd destroy anyone connected to her. Her thumb hovered over the screen, trembling. The gas station door opened outside. She froze, listening. Heavy footsteps echoed on the tile. She grabbed the flash drive and shoved it into her boot. If they found her, at least they wouldn't find that. Then her phone buzzed again. A new message. No sender. Just a sentence. "You can still walk away. Take the money. Leave it all behind." Seconds later, another text came through. This one with a photo. Eli, sitting on their apartment couch, unaware. The message below read, "You have one choice. Protect the truth or protect your brother." Grace's breath caught. Her heart split in two directions, one driven by love, the other by justice. Tears blurred her vision, but her voice was steady as she whispered, "You can't buy me." She deleted the unsent email, then opened a new one addressed to herself. The subject line read, "Backup." She uploaded everything, the files, the recordings, every piece of evidence, and saved it to the cloud with one note. "Release automatically if I don't log in again." Grace slid her phone into her pocket, wiped her eyes, and walked out of the restroom. Her decision was made. She would save both the truth and her brother, even if it meant losing herself. Grace didn't go home after the gas station. She couldn't. The photo of Eli was burned into her mind, the threat ringing louder than the rain on the pavement. Every instinct screamed to run to him. But that's exactly what Richard wanted. He was baiting her, trying to pull her out of hiding. She needed a plan. By dawn, she was sitting in a cheap motel room outside the city, the smell of cigarettes and bleach filling the air. Her wet hair clung to her face as she watched the clock tick toward 7. She hadn't slept, just stared at the laptop screen, refreshing her inbox again and again. Finally, an email arrived. Grace, this is Edward Harkins. I heard what happened. I can meet. But if you're right about Alcott, he'll know I'm involved. Choose a public place. Grace exhaled shakily. A small window of hope. She typed back, fast. The Midtown Atrium. 3 p.m. I'll bring proof. Before she could close the laptop, another message came. No subject, no name. Just a single sentence. She's alive. Her pulse stopped. She stared at it, her breath shallow. Then attached. A photo. Blurry, grainy, but real. Her mother, Veronica, sitting in what looked like a warehouse, her face bruised, her eyes open. A date stamp. Today. Grace's hands shook as she typed back. Where? Please, I'll do anything. The reply came instantly. You already are. She slammed the laptop shut, anger boiling through her exhaustion. You're not going to win, she whispered. At 3 p.m., the Midtown Atrium was crowded. Tourists, shoppers, business people rushing through glass doors. Grace sat at a corner table near the escalators, her hood up, the flash drive hidden in her pocket. Harkins arrived right on time. He was older than she expected, grey hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He moved carefully, scanning the room before sitting across from her. You're Nora's girl, he said quietly. Grace nodded. You knew her? I tried to help her, he said, voice low. But she vanished before we could publish anything. Alcott made her disappear. She's alive, Grace said. I saw a photo this morning. Harkins's eyes widened. Then we don't have much time. Did you bring the files? She pulled the flash drive from her pocket. Everything's on here. His confession, financial records, false contractor, all of it. He reached for it, but Grace hesitated. If I give you this, you publish everything. No deals, no edits. Promise me. I promise, Harkins said. But you should know, once this goes live, there's no going back. He'll destroy anyone connected to it. Grace's voice cracked. He already has. Before Harkins could reply, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and froze. What is it? Grace asked. He looked up slowly. They know I'm here. Grace turned. Across the atrium, 2 men in suits were moving through the crowd, their eyes scanning faces. One of them she recognized, the same man from the pier. Harkins whispered, Go out the side entrance. Now. Grace grabbed the flash drive and ran. She ducked through a service hallway, heart pounding. Behind her, footsteps echoed closer. Then a voice, soft, trembling, called her name. Grace. She stopped dead. Veronica stood at the end of the corridor. Her face was bruised, her wrists scraped raw. But she was alive. Mom, Grace whispered. Veronica stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. You have to stop. Please, Grace. He'll kill Eli if you don't. Grace's throat closed. He already threatened him. Then listen to me, Veronica begged. You can't fight him this way. There's another way. A file he doesn't know exists. It's hidden at the foundation. It's the key to everything. Grace shook her head, overwhelmed. Why tell me now? Veronica cupped her daughter's face with trembling hands. Because I couldn't protect you before. But I can help you now. Promise me, you'll find that file. Before Grace could answer, shouts rang out from the hallway. The men were closing in. Veronica pressed a folded note into her daughter's hand. Run, follow this address. And Grace, whatever happens, don't let him turn you into me. Then she pushed Grace toward the exit as the men stormed in, shouting her name. By the time night fell, Grace had made her choice. She wasn't running anymore. Richard Alcott had built his kingdom on secrets, and tonight she would drag those secrets into the light. The folded note her mother had given her led to a forgotten storage facility beneath the Alcott Foundation's headquarters. Grace had broken in hours before the event, her hands shaking as she searched through rows of old file cabinets and dusty archives. She found it inside a sealed envelope labeled Confidential, Project Legacy. Inside were copies of Richard's original business contracts, the ones that proved everything. The insurance fraud, the false partnership, even the death that built his emperor. But what stopped Grace cold was the last page, a memo addressed to Board of Directors. It read, "In the event of exposure, discredit Nora Miller. Frame her as unstable. Remove all remaining evidence." Grace pressed her fist against her mouth, fighting tears. They'd tried to erase her mother twice, once from the world and once from history. She slipped the file into her bag and looked at her reflection in a dusty window. The woman staring back didn't look like a waitress anymore. She looked like a storm. Now, all that was left was the stage. The Alcott Foundation's annual charity gala began at 8. Cameras lined the marble steps, reporters shouting Richard's name as he arrived in his black limousine, smiling like a man who owned the night. Veronica was not by his side. The press noticed, but Richard brushed it off with a polished grin. "My wife is under the weather," he told them, "but tonight is about hope and generosity." Inside, the ballroom glowed gold. Grace slipped through the service entrance, dressed in the uniform of a caterer. She'd borrowed the outfit from a friend at the event staff agency. Her badge said Mia Lopez, but her eyes gave her away. The plan was simple. During Richard's live speech, she'd plug the flash drive into the media system and stream his confession to every screen in the room and to every network broadcasting the event. She hid behind the stage curtain as the orchestra played, clutching the flash drive like a weapon. Her heart hammered in rhythm with the drums. Then came his voice, smooth, commanding, confident. "Good evening, everyone. Tonight we celebrate not just our foundation, but the legacy we leave for the next generation." The crowd applauded. Grace peeked through the curtain. Richard looked untouchable, his tailored suit, his calm smile, his hand raised as if blessing the room. She thought of Eli, of her mother's trembling hands, of the night she'd dropped that first tray and seen the truth in Veronica's eyes. No more fear. Grace stepped out from behind the curtain, moving toward the main console. The tech operator frowned. "Hey, this area's restricted." She shoved him aside and jammed the flash drive into the port. The screens flickered. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then Richard's recorded voice filled the ballroom. "Do you understand what happens if she talks? Everything falls apart. I built an empire on the ashes of that accident." The crowd froze. Guests exchanged confused looks. Richard's smile faltered. "Turn it off," he barked to his staff. But the sound system was locked. Grace had coded the file to loop. The video projection switched to images, contracts, signatures, police reports, proof of every lie he'd buried. Gasps echoed through the hall. Cameras turned. Grace stepped onto the stage, microphone trembling in her hand. "This is your legacy, Richard Alcott," she said, her voice breaking. "Built on lies, blood, and fear." Richard turned on her, rage twisting his face. "You think anyone will believe a waitress?" Grace met his eyes, her voice steady now. "They'll believe your own words." The crowd erupted in whispers, reporters shouting, phones recording. And then, through the chaos, a familiar voice called from the back of the room. "Believe her," Veronica said. Grace turned, her breath catching. Her mother stood at the entrance, alive, bruised, but unbroken. And for the first time in years, the truth had a face. The room exploded into chaos, gasps, shouts, the crackle of camera flashes. Every eye swung from Grace to Veronica, standing in the doorway. For a split second, time froze. The billionaire's perfect illusion shattered right in front of his donors, his board, the live broadcast. Grace's breath hitched. "Mom!" Veronica's voice trembled, but carried through the hall. "It's over, Richard." Richard stood motionless behind the podium, his jaw tight, the spotlight glaring against his pale face. "Get her out of here," he barked. But no one moved. The crowd wasn't obeying him anymore. They were watching, waiting. Veronica stepped forward slowly, ignoring the guards inching toward her. "Tell them, Richard. Tell them what you did to me. To us." Richard forced a thin smile. This woman is delusional. She's an imposter. Someone my company tried to help years ago after she suffered a breakdown. Don't you dare, Veronica snapped. You staged my death. You told me if I didn't disappear, you'd take my daughter. You made me bury my own name. Gasps rippled through the room. The guests turned toward Richard, murmuring. Cameras zoomed in. Grace felt her pulse in her throat. She stepped closer to the mic, her voice shaking but clear. She's telling the truth. You can see the proof behind me. Every lie, every crime, it's all yours. The projection screen showed the final document. Richard's signature authorizing Nora Miller's termination of employment with a handwritten note. Ensure silence permanently. Richard slammed his fist on the podium. Turn it off. It's too late, Grace said. You can't silence the truth anymore. Security guards rushed toward the control booth, but the tech crew, fed up, curious, or maybe just human, refused to stop the broadcast. Reporters lifted their phones, streaming everything live. Richard's voice broke through the noise. You think this will ruin me? You think anyone cares about some old documents and a couple of sob stories? I built this world, Grace. You can't destroy what I created. Grace's eyes filled with tears. You didn't build anything. You stole it. From her. From everyone you hurt. He laughed bitterly, stepping out from behind the podium. You're just like her. Always believing in morality, in justice. There's no justice, Grace. There's only power. Veronica moved toward her daughter, her hand trembling. Don't listen to him. Richard pointed at her, his voice rising. You think you can shame me in front of my people? You're nothing without me. Something inside Grace snapped. The years of fear, of silence, of pretending to be small, it all broke. She stepped forward until she stood face to face with him. The crowd hushed. You're wrong, she said softly. You needed her. You needed all of us to keep your lie alive. Richard sneered. You're not going to win. Grace's grip tightened on the microphone. I already did. And with that, she turned the mic towards the audience and hit a single button on the console. The screens behind her changed to a new image, one no one expected. Surveillance footage, recovered from the files she'd found. Richard in his office, speaking to his head of security. His voice was clear. Make sure the crash looks accidental. No loose ends. The room went dead silent. For a long moment, even Richard didn't move. Then, with a sudden shout, he lunged at the console. Turn that off! Veronica screamed. Grace! Grace stepped aside, just in time. He stumbled, knocking over a camera tripod. The microphones screeched with feedback. Guards rushed in. Reporters shouted questions. The audience erupted into chaos. Veronica grabbed Grace's hand, pulling her close. It's over, she whispered. But Grace wasn't sure. Richard was still fighting, shouting into the noise. This isn't over. You hear me? I'll bury you both. Grace met his eyes one last time, her voice calm amid the storm. You already did. Now the world finally gets to dig you up. And as police sirens wailed outside, the cameras kept rolling, broadcasting the fall of Richard Alcott live to the world. The ballroom that once glittered with gold now sounded like a riot. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, and Richard Alcott's empire cracked right there under the chandelier's trembling light. Police pushed through the doors as guests scattered in panic. Grace stood frozen beside her mother, clutching her hand, watching everything unfold in slow motion. Richard tried to compose himself. His once slick composure shattered, sweat glistening on his forehead. He pointed at Grace, his voice desperate and raw. She's lying! They're both lying! But the evidence still played behind him, his voice on video, his signature on fake contracts, the photo of her mother's death certificate signed in his hand. Veronica spoke softly, but her words cut through the noise. You can lie to the press, Richard. You can lie to your board. But you can't lie to your own blood. That silenced him. For a brief moment, Richard's eyes flicked toward her. Something human behind the fury. A flicker of guilt or maybe fear. Grace stepped forward, her voice steady. Tell them the truth. He laughed, but it was a hollow, breaking sound. The truth? You want the truth? Fine. You think you're some kind of hero. You're nothing without me. You're the waitress I allowed to exist. Grace stared at him. You didn't allow me anything. I survived you. The crowd gasped. The cameras zoomed closer. Richard's mask finally fell. He turned on Veronica. And you were supposed to stay dead. You ruined everything. Veronica flinched, tears spilling down her cheeks. You ruined me long before that crash. He took a step toward her, but security blocked his path. His voice rose, cracking under pressure. You don't understand. I had to do it. The company was dying. That accident saved everything. By killing your partner, Grace said coldly. The entire room went still. He froze, realizing too late what he'd said. The lead detective stepped forward. We got what we need. Cuff him. Richard's face went white as the officers grabbed his arms. You don't know who I am, he shouted, struggling. You can't arrest me. I built this city. One of the detectives answered dryly. Then maybe you can build a new one from prison. They pulled him away as cameras swarmed, capturing every second. Grace and Veronica stood together at the edge of the stage, breathless, shaking, but still standing. The crowd began to turn. Guests whispered, reporters shouted questions about fraud, murder, deception. The golden walls of Richard's world had become a cage. Veronica turned to her daughter, her voice trembling. You did it, Grace. You stopped him. Grace shook her head. We did it. You survived him. Veronica smiled faintly, the exhaustion etched deep into her face. After all this time, I can finally breathe. The police led Richard through the ballroom doors. Flashbulbs lit his face like lightning. He twisted his head toward Grace one last time, hatred blazing in his eyes. You think this is justice? You think people care about the truth? Grace met his glare calmly. I don't care if they care. I care that it's out there. The doors slammed behind him. The echo lingered like thunder after a storm. For the first time in years, silence filled the room. Veronica turned to her daughter, her voice barely a whisper. I was afraid I'd never see you again. Grace squeezed her hand. You almost didn't. Reporters shouted from across the room, cameras still rolling. Grace, Miss Alcott, what happens now? She looked at the flashing lights, the chaos, the people who once worshipped Richard, now desperate for her words. Grace took a deep breath and said, Now we start over. Veronica smiled through her tears. Together. And as mother and daughter walked off the stage, hand in hand, the giant screens behind them froze on one image. Richard Alcott's booking photo, time-stamped and undeniable proof that the truth had finally won. By morning, Richard Alcott's name was everywhere. News anchors called it the greatest corporate scandal of the decade. Headlines screamed, "Billionaire fraud exposed by long-lost daughter." Grace and Veronica watched it unfold from a small motel room on the city's edge. The TV flickered between news stations, each replaying the same footage. The video confession, the police escort, Richard's furious face as he was shoved into the back of a squad car. Grace sat on the bed, her hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee gone cold. Her mother sat across from her, pale and quiet, the weight of 20 years pressing down like gravity. They're freezing his accounts, Grace murmured. The board resigned. The foundation's shut down. He's finished. Veronica nodded, but her eyes were far away. I've seen him fall before, she said softly. He always finds a way to land on his feet. Not this time. Grace's voice hardened. This time the truth is everywhere. On the screen, a reporter stood outside Alcott Tower. Sources confirm Richard Alcott faces charges, including fraud, conspiracy, and second-degree murder. Grace turned off the TV. You don't have to watch this anymore. Veronica smiled faintly. You think I'm watching him? I'm watching you. Grace looked up, confused. You stood on that stage, Grace, her mother said, tears brimming. You spoke when I couldn't. I spent years hiding because I thought silence was survival. But you reminded me that truth is the only thing that keeps us alive. Grace's throat tightened. Mom. Veronica reached across the bed, squeezing her hand. You gave me back my voice. The moment broke when there was a knock on the door. Both women froze. Grace grabbed the flash drive from the nightstand, still out of habit. Who is it? She called. It's me, came Eli's voice. Grace rushed to open the door. Her brother stood there, breathless, eyes wide. He dropped his duffel bag and hugged her so tightly she couldn't breathe. You're insane, he said, half laughing, half crying. But you did it. You actually did it. Veronica stood, her hand covering her mouth. Eli? He turned toward her. For a heartbeat, he didn't move. Then he whispered, Mom? The air cracked. He stepped forward slowly, his eyes glistening as if afraid she'd vanish if he blinked. She reached out, touching his cheek. You're taller, she said through a shaky laugh. You look just like your father used to, before all this. He pulled her into his arms, sobbing. Grace felt her chest ache watching them. The family that had been broken in half by greed and lies was finally whole again. But peace never came easy. Hours later, Grace's phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. He's not done. Her blood went cold. Mom, he texted me. Veronica frowned. Richard, that's impossible. He's in custody. Grace showed her the screen. The message disappeared, replaced by another. You think prison stops me? You don't know what I built. A loud knock shook the motel door. 3 sharp raps. Not police. Too fast, too deliberate. Eli tensed. Grace, she motioned for silence. Stay behind me. Another knock. Miss Alcott? A voice called. Open up. We're with the Bureau. We need to speak with you about the Alcott case. Veronica looked skeptical. That doesn't sound right. Grace hesitated, every nerve screaming. Then from outside the voice softened. Too calm, too familiar. Grace, it's Richard. You think this ends with a pair of handcuffs? I am the Bureau. Grace's hand tightened on the doorknob, her heart slamming against her ribs. She stepped back. He's bluffing. He has to be. But when the door handle began to turn slowly on its own, she realized, bluff or not, the game wasn't over. Veronica grabbed Grace's arm, whispering, We need to go. Now. And as the door burst open, and men in dark suits flooded the room, Grace understood one final truth. Monsters like Richard Alcott didn't die quietly. The motel door burst open with a crash. Grace flinched, ready to fight. But instead of Richard's hired thugs, 3 federal agents swept into the room, badges raised. FBI, don't move! Veronica froze mid-step, one arm in front of Grace and Eli, as if she could shield them from bullets. Grace's mind spun. Was this another trick? One of the agents, a woman with sharp eyes, lowered her weapon. Grace Alcott? Grace hesitated. Yes. We're here to protect you. Richard Alcott escaped federal custody 2 hours ago. The words hit like a punch. Escaped? The agent nodded grimly. His convoy was ambushed during transport. We don't know how, but he had inside help. He's off-grid. Veronica sank onto the bed, her face pale. He won't stop. He'll come for us. The agent's tone softened. That's why we're moving you. Witness protection until the trial. Grace stared at her, shaking her head. No, I'm done hiding. Ma'am, the agent said firmly, you don't have a choice. But Grace had lived her whole life under someone else's control. Richard's rules, his silence, his shadow. Not anymore. She stood tall, I'm not running again. I faced him once and I'll do it again if I have to. The agent sighed. You're a brave woman, Miss Alcott, but bravery and safety don't always go together. Eli stepped forward. If she's staying, then I'm staying too. Veronica looked at both of them, her voice trembling. You're all I have. Please, just listen to them. Grace met her mother's eyes. I will. But first, I need to finish this. That night, under FBI escort, Grace returned to the city for the first time since the gala. The once glimmering Alcott Tower was surrounded by yellow tape and flashing lights. Reporters huddled outside as investigators carried boxes of evidence out the front doors. The lead agent gestured. You'll want to see this. Inside, the offices looked like the aftermath of a war. Papers scattered, computers smashed, walls cracked where fists had met glass. But on Richard's mahogany desk lay a single item untouched, a framed photo of Grace as a child. She stared at it for a long time, the memory foggy but familiar. Her mother had taken that photo years ago, before everything broke its own. She turned the frame over. On the back, scrawled in neat handwriting, was a note. You were never supposed to find out. Grace swallowed hard. He never saw me as a daughter, she whispered. Just another part of his story. Veronica touched her shoulder gently. You're not his story anymore, sweetheart. You're your own. Grace nodded, setting the photo face down. For the first time, the weight in her chest loosened. She looked out the window at the flashing lights below and exhaled. He can't hurt us anymore, she said quietly. Veronica smiled faintly. Maybe not, but you have to let him go. Grace turned, confusion flickering across her face. Let him go? Her mother nodded. Hate keeps you tied to him. You deserve peace, Grace. So does Eli. So do I. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, echoing the storm that had started all of this. Grace looked at her mother, older now, scarred but alive, and realized she was right. She took her mother's hand, then Eli's. We move forward, she said. Veronica smiled, tears in her eyes. Together. As they walked out of the building, the first light of dawn broke over the skyline, spilling across the city, like forgiveness. For the first time in years, Grace felt free. The scars would never vanish, but they no longer defined her. The truth had burned everything Richard built, but in the ashes, something new was beginning. And as the sun rose higher, Grace whispered the words that finally set her heart free. He doesn't own my name anymore. 3 months later, New York looked different to Grace. The city that once felt cold and merciless now glimmered with something new. Possibility. She walked through Central Park with her mother and Eli, sunlight spilling between the trees, the air crisp with early spring. Life had finally slowed down. Richard Alcott's empire was gone. The courts had frozen his assets. The news cycle had turned him into a symbol of greed and corruption. Every network had aired Grace's story, the waitress who brought down a billionaire. But Grace never cared about fame. What mattered was peace. They stopped by a park bench overlooking the lake. Veronica sat down carefully, still weak from the years of stress and the injuries she'd carried from the night of the kidnapping. Grace handed her a cup of tea, the steam curling into the air. You're getting better, Grace said softly. Veronica smiled. I'm learning how to breathe again. Eli grinned beside them. And how to yell at me for leaving dishes in the sink. Grace laughed, a sound that still felt strange after so much silence. Some things never change. The laughter faded into comfortable quiet. For once, there was no fear behind it. Grace's phone buzzed, a message from the FBI contact who had protected them during the investigation. Sentencing scheduled for today. You don't have to come, but we'll make sure you're updated. She stared at the screen for a long moment, then said, It's today. Veronica looked up. The trial? Grace nodded. He's finally getting sentenced. Eli frowned. Do you want to go? Grace hesitated. For months, she'd dreamed of seeing him pay for everything. She'd imagined what it would feel like to watch the man who ruined their lives in handcuffs, begging for mercy. But now, the idea just made her tired. She shook her head. No, I don't need to hear him say sorry. He wouldn't mean it anyway. Veronica reached for her hand, squeezing gently. Then let's not give him one more second of our lives. They sat together in silence, the kind that felt whole, not empty. Birds scattered across the water, children laughed somewhere behind them, and for the first time since her mother's disappearance, Grace felt the world was turning forward again. Later that afternoon, when they returned home, Grace found a letter waiting in the mailbox. No return address. Just her name, written in precise, familiar handwriting. She opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a legal document transferring ownership of a property in upstate New York. At the bottom was a signature, Richard Alcott. A postscript beneath it read, "The house your mother grew up in belongs to you now. Do what I couldn't. Build something honest." Grace stood in silence, staring at the words. Eli leaned over her shoulder. "Is it real?" "It's notarized," she said quietly. "It's real." Veronica stepped closer, her expression unreadable. "He must have signed it before his arrest." Grace folded the letter slowly, her voice soft. "Maybe it's guilt. Maybe it's his way of saying he lost." Eli shrugged. "Or maybe it's his way of saying he remembered you were human." Grace smiled faintly. "That would be a first." That weekend, they drove to the property, an old farmhouse surrounded by open fields and wildflowers. The windows were cracked, the paint faded, but the place had a heartbeat. Veronica stood on the porch, breathing deeply. "I used to play here," she whispered, "before the world got complicated." Grace slipped her arm around her mother's shoulders. "Then we'll make it simple again." Eli grinned. "We could turn it into a shelter for women who've been through what Mom went through." Grace looked at the horizon, the golden light stretching across the fields. "Yeah," she said softly, "a place where truth starts over." As the sun dipped low, Grace took one last look at the sky, then whispered, "It's done." Veronica smiled through tears. "No, sweetheart, it's just beginning." And as the light faded, mother, daughter, and son stood together on the porch, their past finally behind them, and their future wide open. So that's how the story ends, my friends. You're still here, aren't you? If you've stayed this long, something in Grace's journey must have touched your heart in a quiet, powerful way. Her story reminds us that truth may hurt, but silence hurts even more. Healing doesn't come from revenge. It comes from courage, from choosing peace over bitterness. The Stoics said, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." Grace suffered in fear for years, but when she faced her pain, she found freedom. Maybe that's what we're all searching for, to stop running from what broke us and start building from it instead. Life won't always be fair, but you always have a choice. Stay trapped in someone else's lie, or rise with your own truth. Like Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." If Grace's story reminded you of your own fight, your strength, your scars, or your comeback, then don't keep it to yourself. Like this video, share it with someone who needs a little courage today, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story that might just help you heal a little more.